The church is wrong. I blame the church. I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, and this is today's church conundrum. So, we've all heard people, friends of ours, sometimes say the church is wrong or I blame the church. I'd like to talk a little bit about that right now. First of all, when someone says that statement, what do they exactly mean by the terms when they say the church is wrong and I blame the church? Because these expressions can mean different things to different people. And you have to sit there and get people to talk a little bit about what their feelings are. And the second thing I think to remember about that is when someone says something like that, it's coming from a point of pain, that some people are being hurt by something, and so they use these expressions to give voice to their pain. And so we need to acknowledge that. I think the third thing to think about is this. Now, I don't know, doesn't it feel like to you when someone says, I blame such and such, doesn't it feel to you like they're shifting the burden to another person? You know, it may be an avoidance tactic, and this is a bit of a loaded expression, but does feel like they're scapegoating someone, and this is sort of an easy out for them. Okay, the problem's not me, the problem's the church. Now, remember, different people have different experiences with the churches, so you have to acknowledge that, and so we just can't come down with a boilerplate expression, but just think about that for a little bit, and when you're talking with people, how it feels when they feels to you when they say that. Now, another question is, what do they mean by the church? The church is a big thing with a lot of members, a lot of parts. It covers the entire planet. We're doing a lot of stuff with the church, and you know, what is part of the church are you talking about? It all total? In individual parts. And I think we have to remember something that's said in the Doctrine and Covenants, that the Lord is pleased with the church collectively, but not individually. You know, that's an important distinction that the Lord makes, collectively and not individually. In fact, if you studied philosophy or logic, there's a term called the principle of division, is that what's true for the whole does not necessarily apply to the parts. For example, you may have a good basketball team, but that doesn't necessarily mean that each member of the basketball team is a good player. And it's the same thing with the church. If the church as a total and whole can be good, but it doesn't necessarily mean every part is functioning up to speed. We just had some area training from Elder D. Todd Christofferson, and he talked about alignment. Well, he has to do it because we're having misalignment problems. And here's something else to think about when you think about the church. If you read section 84, and this is something that President Benson talked about, the condemnation associated with the Book of Mormon, is that in section 84, not just the oath and covenant of the priesthood, the Lord talks about how members of the church were not taking the Book of Mormon seriously, and it was such a problem that he put the church under condemnation. And if you remember what President Benson said, you know, this condemnation still has not been lifted. We're still under this condemnation. That's the church. And here's the third thing to think about. In section 93, we read about the members of the First Presidency, Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, and Frederick G. Williams, that the Lord rebukes them because they're neglecting their family. Now keep those three things in mind when someone says, the church is wrong, I blame the church. That's stuff that I'm not quoting the CS letter, I'm quoting the Doctrine and Covenants right here. This is approved from the Lord saying these type of things. So it's good for everyone just to listen up to that and get a feel for that. Now, I'd like to talk about something that when you study negotiation, there's the two books written, I can't remember the author's name, but one's called Getting to Yes, and the follow-up book was called Getting Past No. And it talks about how you negotiate is that you have to keep in mind one thing, is that you have your position and you have your interest. And what your interests are, that's the broader issue, is what you're trying to achieve out of a negotiation. And the smaller thing is your position, the means that you use to achieve your ends. And think of it like when you go to buy cars, that your interest is to get a good car at a cheap price and one that you want, and make sure it's not a lemon. And the dealer's interest is to sell you a car. So that's why you two come together, is because you want to buy, he wants to sell, he or she wants to sell. But the dealer also has to sell, okay, what they have in stock, which cars do they need to get out to make room for the new models. They also need to run at a profit. There's nothing wrong with a profit, because if you don't run a profit, you go out of business, so you can't sell cars. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, car dealers are people too. But your interest is to get the car, but the position is, okay, I want to buy this specific car, I want to get it from this specific dealer. However, the specific dealer may not want to have the car you want in stock, or you just may not be able to meet the dealer's need. And so if you're just focusing on your position where I'm just going to focus on this one dealer, you're going to run into problems. Whereas if you focus on your position of getting a good car, said, okay, let's try another dealer. Do I need another approach? Maybe this car that I don't want is actually a good car, all things considered. And that's something to think about when you hear people say that the church is wrong or I blame the church. Is there focusing on their interest or their position? Is the position the shorter problem? And how you get out of that is you do something called a reframe. And what happens, what you take the statement is that the church is wrong. That's what's called, people in logic call a categorical statement, that this categorical, it applies to every situation. There's no wiggle room, and it's a winner-take-all approach to it. Is that you're basically saying is the church is wrong and I'm right, and it's just a deadlock position because you just can't. In order for you to win, the church has to be wrong. It's a win-lose argument, as Stephen Covey talked about if you read Seven Habits. However, reframe it this way, as opposed to saying the church is wrong, say I have a disagreement with the church. That's a softer assertion. It's what's logic call an I argument, and it leaves room for dialogue, and that you can work towards a solution. That you're not saying, okay, I know everything and I have a handle on the situation, but let's see if we can talk, we can come to a solution. Leaves room for the dialogue, for community, but also for communion. Both of you are able to work together towards a solution. If you take that approach, it's going to work much better than saying the church is wrong. And there's a good example of that, and that's from Benjamin Franklin. If you've ever read his autobiography, he makes a point is that when Benjamin Franklin was younger, he's a bit of a firebrand. He's one of these guys who just take no prisoners and he just try and win arguments all the time. But over time, he learned that if he softened his approach by saying, well, it seems to me, or I imagine such and such is true, if I'm not mistaken, this may be a good course of action. He was able to soften his approach and become more effective, and that's one of the reasons why he's such a good diplomat. He's just very subtle and saying, okay, let's approach it this way without hurting people's feelings. And if you take that way with the church, saying, okay, the church is wrong, versus, okay, I have this disagreement with the church, I may not be able to resolve it, but you start saying the church is wrong, it's like, okay, that just gets you into a harder position. But if you take Benjamin Franklin's approach by saying, okay, this is my point of view, and you reframe it and you focus on your position that, okay, I'm trying to, whatever the trauma I've had in the church, I want to focus on resolving the trauma, not hurting other members and not hurting the church. And so this may not satisfy everyone, but this is a point of view or a strategy that I take, or I'd recommend taking, that if you've had questions or problems about the church, you always say, don't say the church is wrong, say I have a disagreement with the church. And you're going to be able to work to a solution if you soften it that way, just like it worked with Benjamin Franklin. Thank you.